I've started tackling my fabric scraps. In this video, I use my scraps to explore Japanese patchwork styles and along the way improve my measuring and cutting and especially my machine piecing skills. I'm going to be sharing the lessons that I've learned as I work through this book, Japanese Quilt Blocks to Mix and Match by Susan Briscoe. This is an amazing book that I've had for several years now, and I was just looking through my books for inspiration and I saw this. All of the inspiration for these blocks comes from old Japanese designs, Japanese patchwork designs, Japanese parquetry, like the wood inlay designs, as well as kimono fabrics and old futon cover patterns. And the author encourages her readers to either copy the blocks or to use them as inspiration. And she ranks the blocks from 1 pin to 3 pins, depending on how difficult they are. So I do most of the 1 pin blocks. There's some really gorgeous pictures in here, and the colors and the fabrics she uses are just so beautiful. But my colorways are going to be different from the ones that she uses, because this is a scrap project. The fabrics have already been picked out for each block, so it's time to move on to measuring and cutting. So I'm keeping things organized by picking out the fabrics for each block and then sticking the number on them. And this number is the number of the quilt block in the book. So for block 18, I need a fabric to feature as the centerpiece. And I've chosen this as my centerpiece fabric. It is so beautiful. Glad I have a little bit left. For the 2 other fabrics, I chose this dark blue here to be the little squares, and I chose this crazy apricot fabric that I bought sometime in the 90s to be the surrounding fabric right here. It is really satisfying to see it fit perfectly within the lines. So through this process, I do end up creating some scraps from my scraps, and I just cannot throw them away. So I am dividing them, and the bigger pieces end up in this bowl, and I'm going to use them in a future project. I attended an online workshop taught by Aruna Kanora, and it really inspired me to try some spontaneous or unplanned piecing. I found this class on the Tatter Textile Library website, so be sure to check out that website because they offer some really cool classes. I'll link them in the description. My tinier scraps go into this bowl, and I am currently using these for a non-sewing fabric project. Yes, I don't iron it first. I'm going to iron it later. So now I have 4 smaller squares to go with the pretty center square. All of this measuring, cutting strips and things like that, I haven't done a whole lot of it actually. So this has definitely been a learning process for me. So what I'm saying is it's probably a very efficient way of doing this. Although I don't know, this is scrappy rotary cutting and measuring. So maybe there isn't a really efficient way to do this. If there is an efficient way, let me know, because I'd love to know. I did learn something about rulers while doing this scrap project. I learned that it's really handy to have a ruler this size. This is, I think, a 12.5 by 6.5 inch ruler. It is so handy for these smaller pieces in terms of squaring and measuring them. Before, I just had this big guy and some other big ones like this. This makes such a difference. It's so much easier than wrangling this guy around all the time. Having said that, I'm going to use this one now. Actually, I need to get rid of this annoying thing right here. This is just annoying me. Okay, now this is going to be important because I need to orient everything so this is facing up. The time has flown by while I do this. Oh, darn it. Does anyone have a tip for that? When you don't cut all the way through, is there a good way to go back and rescue it? The next one, I'm going to do a color combination that I normally wouldn't do or have never done before. And it's going to be for this block number 23. I'm going to do purple and green together. Whoever designed this fabric thinks that purple and green go together well, and they do in this fabric. So, and this has a little bit of purple, this is green. I'm not sure how it's gonna look, but let's give it a try and just play with the color a little bit. Okay, that was really bad because I didn't, I didn't cover this. No. Well, hope that works out. I have no recollection of this. Why did I cut a big curve here? That's very strange. Okay, let's go put this together. So I've brought my ironing operation downstairs. This is the only time of day where I get good light down here, so I like to sit down here and take advantage of it. I've cut out all the pieces for this project, and they're all stacked up here in piles with numbers on them. And the numbers, of course, refer to the number of the block. So what I have to do now is press every little piece, and then I can start sewing them together. These pieces I cut out for one of the blocks and decided it didn't go in there, and the same with this fabric as well. This fabric was the lining of a purple velvet vest that my mom and I made together when I was in middle school. It was pretty groovy. I mean, that was back in the early 80s. So these two are gonna be test fabrics, and I'm gonna try piecing them together before I get started on the real blocks. Let's see, I'm gonna use a dry iron and just give them a little press. Yeah, that should be fine. I have to be very, very careful not to iron these things so they don't stretch out of shape. They're mostly cut on the grain, hopefully, if I did it right. This is gonna take a long time. What I should have done is iron the fabric before I cut it out. But I was so busy just getting straight to work on cutting out these scraps. So for my setup here, I just have my little two-sided pressing mat and rotary mat. Then I have a big cushion on my lap. This little mat is one of the best purchases I've made. It's amazing how much use I get out of this, especially if you do paper piecing or little scrap quilts, things like this. It makes perfect sense because you don't need a huge ironing surface. This big board of all my pieces, finding a place to keep it where it's not gonna get stepped on or barfed on or played with by my cat. So I've actually kept it in the bathtub upstairs. She never goes in there, but you know how cats get kind of crazy sometimes? They get the zoomies. I could just see her like zooming across and like frisking around the, the pieces. Test block has been ironed. My iron is talking to me. What's the matter? So I don't think I'll get to the sewing today because I've got to get all this ironing done. And this Friday, today is Wednesday, I am headed off to see my parents again. I go there about every 6 weeks and stay a week with them, kind of check in and see how they're doing. And my sister's there as well and other family members. So I need to get things prepared for that trip. And I think I'm going to turn the camera off. But before I go, I want to show you the progress I've made on my hand quilting on this quilt. Right now, I am working on this green corner. And I love it, love it, love it when the quilting goes off onto the blue border. And then down here, we have some red. Here you can see some yellow. And then the back is looking pretty quilted. Yeah, it's gonna be done pretty soon, and then I have to decide about the binding and how I'm gonna hang it. Okay, so I'm gonna turn off the camera and just get busy with ironing. I have laid up here the pieces for my test block. Now I have to pin them together, and I think what I'm gonna do is, sew these in rows like that. I'm gonna use my tiny little applique pins. Do you just pin two at a time? I don't know. I did take a picture of this block so I can go back and look at it if I forget how I put it together. It's nice to do something standing because I was sitting all morning ironing those pieces. What I need to do is go outside because it's beautiful. Oop, it's beautiful outside. I'm gonna take a walk at 4 with my favorite little corgi friend. I'm already confused. I cannot multitask. I have to think about what I'm doing and just what I'm doing. I'm going to be using this 50 weight Aurifil in this neutral color, and I need to fill my bobbin first. They look like they're matched up. I just rewatched this machine piecing video by Leah Day Quilting. It was such a great video, and she presses her seams open. She uses a tiny stitch length and a fine thread like a 50 weight, and then she finger presses them open first, and then she presses them. In the past, I have pressed things to the side. I am going to try pressing everything open and see how that looks. Here is the one that I've pressed open so far. And this is how I did it. Open it up, I'm gonna scrape it with my fingernail, then I can stick the iron on it. Here is what the test block looks like. Here's the back of it. This took forever, and I think you can see why it took forever. There's just so many little tiny pieces. So anyways, I feel confident now doing my piecing. And then last night, I was like, I gotta get going on this. So I put together block number 18. I am not thrilled with this, and the only reason is because I don't like this fabric. There's a reason why it hung around in my closet for so long. That's one thing you learn about using, about using your scraps. You may not be using these fabrics because you don't like them. I think it would have been better if this had been darker, But you learn. This is how you learn about color and light and dark, or at least how I learned. So first they go across like that, then they get turned. I think you can see where this is going. And then finally it comes up from the bottom like this. I can't wait to see how this one turns out. So I'll come back when I've sewn it together. There it is, block number 2. I love all these blueprints together. It didn't go perfectly, but that's fine. There are a few things. One of them is this difference here. Like what in the world? But I'm very pleased with how they came together, all the points where they meet up. Here is block number 3. I think it's going to be kind of a cool effect. I think on the front it looks really good, but it hides a multitude of issues. Look at these guys. They get folded under as I'm sewing. How do you prevent that? So I'd love any tips or tricks for that. Okay, I've got to pack up this whole enterprise. Going to visit my parents for a week. My poor husband. His dad got norovirus in the middle of the night last night, and he's with them, and I know he's gonna get it. He's like, go, go, go. Get out of town. I'm gonna pack my things and I'm out of here first thing tomorrow. Yeah, fingers crossed that I don't get it. So here they are. I just got back from my trip to see my parents, and I got a lot done while I was there. It was really nice actually, because I could set up my sewing machine in the dining room of their house, and they were doing a puzzle and I was sewing these blocks, and it was really kind of nice spending that time together like that. The process was so addictive. When I wasn't working on these, I kept thinking about when I could get back to working on these, because it was like doing a puzzle. There are a few that I'm going to have to redo. For instance, and this illustrates some of these lessons that I have learned. This one, block number 12, I did not make this center section big enough. I don't know what happened. It is not as wide as it needs to be. So look at that measurement, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, then cut it out, then remeasure it before you sew anything together. I thought I was being careful, but things like this happen. Another thing I've learned. This guy right here, block number 4, you can see the wonky edges. Guess what? I did measure everything correctly for this one, but you know what I think the problem is here? These fabrics are thick. They're like thicker than normal quilting fabrics. So these thicker fabrics messed up the 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is my theory anyways. This one I'm going to redo. I can't stand to leave it like this. But this one is going to be made of different fabrics. So I'll show that in a little bit. So my lesson here that I learned, particularly from this block, is to think about the thickness of your fabric and take that into consideration when cutting. I'm not sure what I would do differently. I don't know how I would calculate cutting these pieces out a little more generously. I don't know. There's probably some math equation involved in that I just can't fathom right now. But yes, I will have to think about that next time I do a scrappy block like this that's made of so many thick pieces. The other block that I'm going to redo is number 18. Now it's sewed together just fine, but I hate the color combination on this. The design is a little overpowering for this particular block. The feature is supposed to be in the middle. So we're going to redo this one in a different fabric way. Colorway, fabric way. I'm going to go ahead and get busy recutting some fabric and cutting anew some of the fabric for these blocks that I'm going to replace. So I'll be back in a little bit. Okay, I'm going to fix block number 12 first. This is the one that I cut too small a piece here for some reason, I have no idea. Because I'm using that tiny stitch, I really don't want to unpick that. I've had to unpick a few, and it is very inconvenient for that, I have to say. I can use this again for another scrap project, so I'm going to put these in my scrap bag again. Look at that. I'm about to cut on my ironing pad. Oh my goodness. 1, 2, 3.5. I'm going to count it one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 3.5 by 6. I thought I was being this careful when I initially cut it, so it's really hard to trust myself. Now I just have to be extra careful. Why do I feel like this still isn't big enough? Where's my old one? I think the same thing is going to happen again. What in the world? I think what I figured out is this piece is supposed to be 3.5 by 6.5 inches. Because look, it's a 1/2 inch short. Maybe it was just a misprint? I don't know. Now it's time to reimagine this one. My center square is going to be this little random batik. And then this part is going to be this wave pattern, like that. And then these corners are going to be that color. I think it's going to look a lot better than this. All right, here's a lesson. This is how it's going to be laid out. This is in the center, and I cut out the 2 bigger pieces, but they need to be oriented this way. The only problem with that is that the pattern is this wave pattern. And it really needs to be oriented this way. I think what I'm going to do is recut them so that the pattern is oriented the correct way. Another thing to keep in mind, I'm about to sew together the 3 blocks that I recut yesterday. But before I start, I wanted to show you a couple things that I bought that I'm hoping might make a difference in getting a really accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance. I mean, I've been as careful as I can with the cutting and the looking at the measurements and the checking and the double checking, but I also found some tips about the types of pins to use when pinning together the pieces. I've been using these little applique pins, but I saw a video, I can't remember which one it was, where the person said that they really, really liked the Clover patchwork pins. So what I'm going to do is pin together a couple of pieces, and we can see if it makes a difference. Because sometimes they would be perfectly lined up. Put the pin in, and then they were like, wah, it just moved the fabric, I guess the thickness of the pin. So the other thing that I purchased, and I bought this because someone said that you should always check the 1/4 inch measurement if you're using a foot on your sewing machine to guide the 1/4 inch seam. They said you should definitely check it out. I bought this Madame Sew seam guide ruler, and it's got all these little holes with different measurements. And you bring the needle down into whatever measurement you want for your seam. So I'm going to put it down through the 1/4 inch hole, and you see if the foot is accurate. And then you can also use this little snap-on seam guide that's magnetic. Now it's in the 1/4 inch measurement, and you can see that it really does look like the foot lines up with the edge here. So you can then take this guy, put him there as well to be another guide. I want it kind of in front of the foot because I want to make sure it's going in not at an angle, but straight. That's good news that my sewing machine foot has been doing a nice 1/4 inch this whole time. So now I'm going to experiment with the pins. One side I'm going to pin on with the applique pins, which I've been using, and the other side I'm going to pin on with the fine patchwork pins. It's a little bit uneven there. Let's see what happens when I pin on with the patchwork pins. I like these pins already. They go boop right through. Whereas the applique thicker pins, I felt like I was kind of forcing it sometimes. Even if I end up with the same result, I like using these patchwork pins because they go in so easily and I feel like I'm not stabbing my fabric. I almost forgot. Another really important thing I learned was using a thread bunny or a starter and finisher, or people have different names for these things, to get started to manage the thread when you start sewing. And then you can just kind of chain piece until you get to the end, and then you can put in another one to end it. Okay. Looks like this needs to be moved up because my pins are going to get in the way because I want it to be pinned into the last minute. So if it's here, then really what's the point of having it? Because the foot is doing a good enough job. So I'm just going to use my foot to guide now that I know for sure that it's a true 1/4 inch. What happened there? What is going on with my sewing? If you're watching and you know what's going on with my sewing, please tell me. I'd really appreciate it. All right, so that was with the applique pins, although I'm beginning to suspect that it's not a matter of the pins, it's a matter of who's using the pins, aka me. See, I can see it pushing the brown fabric. So for some reason, the top fabric is getting pushed along over the bottom, so I'm ending up with this little bit extra at the end. How do you fix that? Do I just need more pins? Let's see if it lines up with the block now. I'm so pleased it worked out. Look at it. Now it measures properly. So this is going to join its friends on the wall of quilt blocks, and I'm going to put together the other two that I cut out last night. And I'm going to keep using the thin patchwork pins because they're just a pleasure to use. If a pin can be a pleasure to use, these are a pleasure to use. Just because it's like putting a pin in butter. Here's before and here's after. Now maybe it's just because I'm partial to blues, but I think this is a better looking block than this. This surrounding pattern was just way too busy to highlight this central square. And then these dark things were too dark a contrast. So this is a better use of this pattern. That's just my opinion. I realized another thing that I have learned about pinning. Once I got it all lined up, I kept finding that it would travel on me when I stuck the pin in. So I don't know if this is just through, I've done this so many times now with this project, very gently holding things in place and very gently pushing that pin in, then checking the placement again, and so carefully pinning this next one so it doesn't shift the fabric. And that seems to do the trick. It works for me now. I did not realize how important pinning was to this whole process. I also learned about how to line up seams so that when you have to sew two seamed areas together, the seams will meet. So what I've been doing is making sure this looks lined up and then pull this one down, look to see that the lines are lined up, and then kind of keep it pinched there in place. And then I've been putting the pin right in the seam allowance. This is so fuzzy, but so important. Have I got enough pins in there? So I try to keep my pins in to the last minute, especially the ones that are holding these seams together all lined up. In the meantime, the underside of the seam, I wonder what's happening to it. Is it getting folded over? Who knows? All right, they look lined up. Yep. As I've worked on this project, One thing I realized that I was doing was starting to ignore this as I got close to the end because I was so focused on making sure I had the other one ready, like it was a race or time was going to run out or something, that I was not guiding this properly till the end. So I have some pieces that kind of veered off to the side away from the seam guide here. So, as I've worked through all these blocks, one thing that I've learned is that I really need to pay attention to the very end of a piece that I'm sewing and then think about guiding in the next piece. The other thing I found helpful with dealing with the ends of pieces is, since these are really narrow little pieces, is using a tool instead of my fingers to help guide it. And my finger's just too big at this point to help guide it through evenly at the end. This turned out so much better than this one. Remember the edges here? It was just so off. And that means I am finished sewing these blocks together. I have loved using my scraps to build these Japanese patchwork blocks. These block designs are so interesting, and it's been so cool to see my fabric put into new settings and combined in different ways. Now, someone more knowledgeable than me about quilting could say if any of these resemble traditional Western patchwork styles, but some of these look very, very non-Western to me, such as this one, and this one for sure is very unusual. Let me know what you think about these blocks. They are so interesting that I've already got plans to move on to the second level designs in Susan Briscoe's book. Remember that they are rated from 1 to 3 pins in difficulty, and I did most of the 1 pin blocks. So next is the 2 pin blocks, and I already bought another one of her books. This is another Japanese patchwork block book, but it's done in the traditional Japanese taupe colorway. I'm not sure if I'll use that colorway. I don't have any colors like that in my collection, but I plan to use some of these block styles. If you're at all interested in Japanese quilting or unusual patchwork designs, I really advise you to check them out. I'll leave a link to those books in the description. But the cherry on top of this whole project has been everything that I have learned about cutting, pinning, and machine piecing. Remember, I am more of a hand quilter and hand piecer. I think I've only machine pieced 2 quilts, so this is a new experience for me, and I learned a lot. If you're low down on the experience ladder like I am in terms of using the machine, I hope that you found some of these lessons helpful. And I hope that everyone is now more inspired to go get their scraps and start playing with them and trying out blocks that you've never even thought of trying before. Maybe dig out some of your old quilting books and see what you can put together with your scraps. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!